What is up, y'all? It's your boy Araki coming at you with another video. My Hero Academia Chapter 305 review. This is another one that we're not going to do the page-by-page format for, just due to the way and the nature of the flow of the conversation. It would just be choppy and weird. So, the immediate clarification here, though, is can you kill Tomura Shigaraki isn't about I want you to kill Shigaraki or not. It's about the fact that Deku may or may not have to address that issue. And I think it's kind of poignant for you to make sure that we immediately address this and finally get to have this conversation, because we've had discussions on how heroes can potentially be too violent. But then you look at the way that Endeavor tried to handle Shigaraki when he was out the capsule, and he straight up said, like, a normal person with the Hell's Curtain on them shouldn't be surviving. One of the things that we also gotta address, though, is like All Might tried to kill All for One. Literally, like, you can tell he punched the dude so hard he's bald. He punched him bald and blind. Like, how do you punch a man so hard he loses his hair? That don't even make sense. Anyway, Horikoshi has to be somebody who just, like, consistently factors in the human condition or the way people respond to things, because we get Banjo being like, yo, he literally didn't look like he was trying to be saved. I understand you was like, talking about that meat suit, but you got to remember that this dude is crazy. And everybody's kind of like, yeah, like, I do agree that, he's in a pretty bad spot there. They basically, like, everybody's like, yeah, Shigaraki's down bad. Lil Tomura is down bad. We understand that. But the reality is that All for One has tried to steal this quirk multiple times and ended up failing. We get confirmation that Banjo and his disciple both ended up in positions where he really was, like, almost stealing it, which is likely means that, like, N had his arm ripped off. All for One went to steal his quirk, and when he couldn't do it, just, like, went and discarded him or something, and he managed to barely escape. So we probably had one of those blowbacks similar to what we saw with Deku and Shigaraki when they kind of had that explosion pull them apart after he tried to absorb the quirk. And people have been speculating that N's quirk might be something to do with smoke. So maybe if he had, like, a smoke form ability, then, like, as soon as they blew back, he transformed into smoke and then flew off to see Nana and give her the quirk before he died, or, like, knew where she was. One of the things that I think is actually important to note, though, is that while we're having this discussion about the way One for All is supposed to be used, is that specifically on the page where it says One for All is tasked with destroying All for One, that page is the one where we get to see what appears to be either, we don't know if it's the second or third user, but I think the one with the gauntlets is the second one, where we see him in the background. And one of the things that we kind of discussed with this chapter is that if they're all okay, like the ones who were sitting down were more or less okay with the feelings of wanting to save him, as long as Deku understood that there's a chance that he can't save him. But the 2 and the 3 in the back, more than likely just with impunity, are like, he needs to be destroyed, kill him, don't waste my time even, like, sort of talking about him being a decent or redeemable person. We got to take him out. They grew up in way harsher times. All for One likely was really out here wilding back then, because even they would have been in a minority of people with quirks back then. They would have had to deal with the oppression of others, plus the mission of killing All for One. So these are people who were going to do a thankless job, whereas the 4th user, like, kind of bailed them. By the 5th user, heroes were a thing, and that's part of why it's easier to track them. So that kind of gives us an idea of the social changes as quirks spread through society and what was going on. So more than likely, it's their feelings towards how Deku is as a person that has him against the wall, because, like we said, they clearly would have had a conversation about this, and we talked about that last week. And so we know now that, like, yeah, they clearly have chosen to not talk to Deku yet. But one of the things we talked about in the server after this chapter was also that the moth imagery that is attached to Shigaraki is often used as a depiction of someone who's moving towards the light, the flames to bring hope. So even though Shigaraki is considered like an ultimate evil in the advent of the end, there is still a light that will come from his destruction, depending on how he's handled, I think, is what the point moreover is. And Deku actually says something important in response to this too, which is that I don't know what I'll do, but there's a piece of him that's worth trying to save, and I want to try to do that too, because both matter. And this is where I think it more or less confirms what I took away from last chapter with and what I've been saying about the vestiges, where I'm pretty sure that your perception affects your look and how you can move. I think that because Deku interprets One for All as 45%, he only has access to like 45% of his body in the vestige world. But we see that as he's affirming his beliefs, as he's got confidence in himself, and he's thinking about those days and what Shigaraki is like, we get that callback to the river scene, but we switch out Bakugo and we have Shigaraki holding Monchan as Deku is approaching him in this blinked white space to show that, like, no matter what, there's all this destruction, but I would like to acknowledge the small child that led to this. And that's important because the thing that's going to allow Hero Society to be better and evolve and actually take care and factor in other people and their needs is going to be acknowledging the pain and suffering of other people. And we can't just have a solution that is, I just beat the crap out of every villain and go about my day. That is not going to be what fixes Hero Society, Quirk Society. What's going to fix it is accommodating, understanding each other, and figuring out how we're supposed to actually move instead of trying to keep a baseline as close to traditional old school world as possible. That's just not the world we live in anymore, and we need to acknowledge that and then plan and move accordingly. So Deku is going to try to do his best to save people regardless of their condition, and he's not going to act with discrimination. If he can help you, he's going to help you, and that's what we'll figure out. And that's something that even within the provisional license exam was foreshadowed when he saved Kami, quote, who he thought was originally Ochako, but he was like, no, Ochako's been working on her floating, she wouldn't fall, so even though that's not Ochako, I still have to save her. So provisional license, the arc that we all kind of, oh man, it's after Kamino and it's before Overhaul, once again, paying dividends here. Deku has been a person who saves without discrimination the entire series, and now we see that unfold. It's also worth noting that while like Shoto, Momo, Bakugo, and many other characters have made comments like, oh, dog, lizard, bug, blah, 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 these jokes about other people's quirks as like deformities and like dehumanizing them to a certain degree, I don't think we've ever seen Deku say something like that. Because all quirks are inherently valuable to him. He doesn't see the people with mutant quirks and go, oh, dog. Like, no, he respects them always. Even when the chief and Hosu kept going, woof, like, it threw him off, but he didn't say anything. He didn't go, wow, what a dog. Like, oh, he is. Like, no, that doesn't seem to be a thing with Deku. So we're kind of seeing the culmination of multiple social issues that have been highlighted and hinted in the background of the story, slowly intersecting and weaving and combining. And as we pass through the story, it's just really coming into focus into like a singularity, a single point. And that single point is becoming Deku. Deku is embodying the series in so many different ways that I think it's just underappreciated, to the extent where I may just have to do another video on the lad. But yeah, I actually liked this conversation a lot with Deku and the Vestiges, because he straight up acknowledges that he may have to kill Shigaraki. I think it's like there's people always talk about, oh, like I hate when even I hate when characters adamantly stick to no killing rule, because I'm like no, dude, just be a pragmatist. And that's what I like about this. He's fully admitting, I don't want to kill Shigaraki. I want to save him. But it's important to note that when he's calling back, what he's saying is, just because I want to do this, and maybe I could have done things differently, but never forget, I always folded any nigga in my path. Deku 2021. I always folded these niggas. Maybe they didn't need that ass beating as bad as I gave it to them. In the case of Gentle, you see him thinking about, but I always did what I had to do. And that's kind of what I respect about Deku, is just the man always does what he needs to do. He hasn't gone out of his way to, balk or run from his responsibilities. He's been nervous or skittish, sure, but Deku gets the job done. And this review actually ends up being a little shorter than normal, which I'm fine with, because I think algorithmically that might finally help me. But I just think it's really important to note that the perspective thing that really seems to shape, because I've noticed that there was also an image of Nana with full sleeves, and I kind of think that when you look at her posture in that scene, she looked a bit more reserved and down. And then this one, as she was talking to Deku and like asserting and like talking about the hero ideology, that like, she got back into that hero form and the bare guns came back out, like that confidence seems. So like the perception and image of a person within the vestige world is mercurial. It can shift like we saw with Deku. And once again, this time, the thing that I find fascinating is Nana goes, Sorahiko, we made a bad decision, but we've been blessed with wonderful disciples. So, we may slowly be getting confirmation that my worst fear for Gran Torino is true and that he's basically a deadbeat parent and kind of put the burden off on Nana a lot and then wasn't there for her. But was there to be a hero, which is yikes. Nana would have deserved a lot better than that. So if that's the case, I really don't want Gran Torino to live at that point, not because of story writing, but because fuck you. Actually, I'm gonna edit that out. Gran Torino's a bum if he really did to Nana what I think he did to Nana, which is basically got her pregnant and was like, no, I'm a hero, I'm not trying to have a family, peace. So I really, really hope that Gran Torino was just like Kotaro's uncle. I need him to not be that bummy, because the idea of him being so good to Toshinori and so good to Deku, and then just for his own family and his wife in that department, yikes. And the last thing I kind of want to talk about here is, actually there's two things. One, we are getting the second and third user reveal. One of them is at least talking to Deku next chapter. This has to be addressed. It's finally going to be addressed. This is it. We're getting to the moment of truth. I'm not really the big fan of time travel Bakugo, but hey, next week we're finally gonna know. We finally get to decide if this is the end. The most controversial theory in the community will finally be put to rest next week, hopefully. Or will be confirmed and then we'll just deal with it. In which case, definitely aliens. And the second thing that I wanted to touch on before I ended the video was that I really like that My Hero Academia and Jujutsu Kaisen has done this as well. Make it a point to acknowledge that these are children and that children actually aren't supposed to be in these positions. Because the idea of grown people telling modern day 15, 16-year-olds to go out there and risk their lives for them is messed up. So in turn, having people like Nanami and Nana and Rocklock be like, this is pathetic. Same thing with like Midnight. Them really feeling bad about this is an important detail, because I kind of hate how stories just kind of brush aside the fact that like adults should be handling these problems and it shouldn't be falling to children. So that whole trope constantly not being utilized, and instead that being a focal point in commentary within the story, is great, because there is a certain naivety to Deku's dreams, and that's why also it's emphasized that he's a 16-year-old boy, because I think people are so used to secretly these teenagers are basically adults in teenage bodies because we want to sell it to high schoolers, that they don't realize that they themselves, oftentimes as teenage manga readers and just teenagers in real life, tend to have more naive and like hopeful views, and they're going to try to like push for these things, and sometimes that naivety is rewarded, and it isn't naivety, it's just goodwill in that moment then. So this emphasis needs to be painted more realistically, and that's what I love about My Hero and about the conversations that Hanami had early in JJK about Itadori being a child. Jesus, stumbling over my words. Y'all have a wonderful day. I'll see y'all for the next Church of MHA. Clearly, I'm still tripping on my tongue. Y'all be blessed.